What is something that a fictional chacter said that stuck with you? Serious. When a child first catches adults out when it first walks into his grave little head that adults do not always have divine intelligence, that their judgments are not always wise, their thinking true, their sentences just his world falls into panic desolation. The gods are fallen and all safety gone. And there is one sure thing about the fall of gods, they do not fall a little, they crash and shatter or sink deeply into green muck. It is a tedious job to build them up again, they never quite shine. And the child's world is never quite whole again. It is an aching kind of growing east of Eden, John Steinbeck. My first time, Afghanistan. We were moving through a house and, suddenly a man was there and I shot him in the stomach. Yeah, that's a real war story. There are never any good stories like in movies, they're shit. A man was there, boom, stomach. I was so scared I didn't pull the trigger again for the rest of the day. I thought, well, that's it, Bacho. You put a bullet in someone. You're not you anymore. You'll never be you again. But then you wake up the next morning and you're still you. And you realize, that was you all along. You just didn't know. From the 4th episode of Chernobyl. I think this is most critical to understand with regard to others. It's important to understand this regarding yourself, but it's also easier to incorporate all context in judgments of yourself. You should forgive yourself for failures and that might take some cognitive effort, but you were also present for the whole situation and know all the facts. It can be harder, but no less important, to be compassionate to others when they fail, because you may not have all the context for it. And when you don't have all the context, it's tempting to write off others' failures as them just not doing the right things or having the right motivations or whatever. Essentially an extension of the fundamental attribution error. Guys have underestimated me my entire life. And for years, I never understood why. It used to really bother me. But then one day, I was driving my little boy to school and I saw this quote by Walt Whitman, and it was painted on the wall there. It said, "Be curious, not judgmental." I like that. So I get back in my car and I'm driving to work, and all of a sudden it hits me. All them fellas that used to belittle me, not a single one of them were curious. You know, they thought they had everything all figured out. So they judged everything, and they judged everyone. And I realized that they're underestimating me, who I was had nothing to do with it. Sam's speech in Lord of the Rings. Frodo, I can't do this, Sam. Sam, I know. It's all wrong. By rights we shouldn't even be here. But we are. It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo. The ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger, they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end. Because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come. And when the sun shines it will shine out the clearer. Those were the stories that stayed with you. That meant something, even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I know now. Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going. Because they were holding on to something. GD explaining death like a wave returning to the ocean at the ending of The Good Place really hits me every time I read it, hear it, or have a bad mood that really needs some emotional purging. Picture a wave in the ocean. You can see it, measure it, its height, the way the sunlight refracts when it passes through, and it's there, and you can see it, and you know what it is, it's a wave. And then it crashes on the shore and it's gone. But the water is still there. The wave was just a different way for the water to be for a little while. That's one conception of death for a Buddhist. The wave returns to the ocean, where it came from, where it's supposed to be. Had dreams. 2 of M. Both had my father in M. It's peculiar. I'm older now than he ever was by 20 years. So, in a sense, he's the younger man. Anyway, the first one I don't remember too well, but it was about meeting him in town somewheres and he give me some money. I think I lost it. The second one, it was like we was both back in older times and I was on horseback going through the mountains of a night. Going through this pass in the mountains. It was cold and there was snow on the ground and he rode past me and kept on going. Never said nothing going by, just rode on past. And he had his blanket wrapped around him and his head down. When he rode past, I seen he was carrying fire in a horn the way people used to do, and I could see the horn from the light inside of it, about the color of the moon. And in the dream I knew that he was going on ahead and he was fixin' to make a fire somewhere out there in all that dark and all that cold. And I knew that whenever I got there, he'd be there. And then I woke up. Sheriff Ed Tom Bell from No Country for Old Men. It is a curious thing, the death of a loved one. We all know that our time in this world is limited, and that eventually all of us will end up underneath some sheet, never to wake up. And yet it is always a surprise when it happens to someone we know. It is like walking up the stairs to your bedroom in the dark, and thinking there is one more stair than there is. Your foot falls down, through the air, and there is a sickly moment of dark surprise as you try and readjust the way you thought of things. Lemony Snicket. Perhaps he also thought that you were Saruman, said Gimli. But you speak of him as if he was a friend. I thought Fangorn was dangerous. Dangerous, cried Gandalf. And so am I, very dangerous, more dangerous than anything you will ever meet, unless you are brought alive before the seat of the Dark Lord. And Aragorn is dangerous, and Legolas is dangerous. You are beset with dangers, Gimli son of Gloin, for you are dangerous yourself, in your own fashion. Certainly the forest of Fangorn is perilous, not least to those that are too ready with their axes, and Fangorn himself, he is perilous too, yet he is wise and kindly nonetheless. But now his long slow wrath is brimming over, and all the forest is filled with it. The coming of the hobbits and the tidings that they brought have spilled it, it will soon be running like a flood, but its tide is turned against Saruman and the axes of Isengard. A thing is about to happen which has not happened since the elder days, the Ents are going to wake up and find that they are strong. For me was the Rocky's speech to his son in Rocky 6. Let me tell you something you already know. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. You, me, or nobody is gonna hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard ya hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. Have you ever seen the aftermath of a suicide bombing? I have. The shock wave knocked me flat, blew out my eardrums. I couldn't hear the smoke. It was like being underwater. I went inside. A nightmare. Blood. Parts of people. You could tell where he was standing when the vest blew. It was like a perfect circle of death. There was almost nothing left of the people closest to him. 17 dead, 46 injured. Blown to pieces. The closer they were to the bomber, the more horrific the effect. That's every suicide. Every single one. An act of terror perpetrated against everyone who's ever known you. Everyone who's ever loved you. The people closest to you, the ones who cherish you, are the ones who suffer the most pain, the most damage. Raymond Reddington, The Blacklist. There's a saying. Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery. But today is a gift. That's why it's called a present. Master Oogway from Kung Fu Panda. Edit. Thank you person in the replies of my comment for letting me know. So this quote is actually originally from a man named Michael Babatunde Olatunji, if I understood correctly. Also, I searched it up and a lot of people who said it came up. I'm not sure who was the first one though. I just remembered the quote and I just heard it in Kung Fu Panda. I put the name of the person that someone in the replies said, so if it's not correct I apologize. 3. This is a pretty underrated quote honestly. It highlights something about the nature of choice that I think people rarely care to think about, that we make them a lot sooner than we think. Not just in a literal neurological sense but also in the sense that what a person perceives as their options for any given choice isn't something we ourselves choose. Our environment, experiences, and general nature direct our perception of what our options are and then from there we make our choice, though it can be argued that even at this stage we don't have free choice since the factors involved in us that determine which option we will choose are beyond our direct control, but that not as important to this particular discussion. So for Neo, at that point, with his nature, his experiences, and his environment there was only one option to choose from. Sure, he is presented with more than that, but there was only one option that Neo would be willing to choose. He just needed to understand why that is. I think human consciousness is a tragic misstep in human evolution. We became too self-aware, nature created an aspect of nature separate from itself. We are creatures that should not exist by natural law. We are things that labor under the illusion of having a self, a secretion of sensory experience and feeling, programmed with total assurance that we are each somebody, when in fact everybody's nobody. I think the honorable thing for our species to do is deny our programming, stop reproducing, walk hand in hand into extinction, one last midnight, brothers and sisters opting out of a raw deal. Rustin Cottle, True Detective S1. Reminds me of this quote from The Stand. Show me a man or a woman alone and I'll show you a saint. Give me two and they'll fall in love. Give me three and they'll invent the charming thing we call society. Give me four and they'll build a pyramid. Give me five and they'll make one an outcast. Give me six and they'll reinvent prejudice. Give me 7 and in 7 years they'll reinvent warfare. Man may have been made in the image of God, but human society was made in the image of his opposite number, and is always trying to get back home. Once upon a time, there was a crooked tree and a straight tree and they grew next to each other, and every day the straight tree would look at the crooked tree and say, "You're crooked. You've always been crooked and you'll continue to be crooked. But look at me," said the straight tree. He said, "I'm tall and I'm straight." And then one day the lumberjacks came into the forest and looked around, and the manager in charge said, "Cut all the straight trees." And that crooked tree is still there to this day, growing strong and growing strange. Neller from Wrist Cutters, A Love Story. This one's always stuck with me, and was the first quote that actually made me think. It was actually Doyle who made me realize something that I've never thought of before. There are so many stories where some brave hero decides to give their life to save the day, and because of their sacrifice, the good guys win, the survivors all cheer, and everybody lives happily ever after. But the hero never gets to see that ending. They'll never know if their sacrifice actually made a difference. They'll never know if the day was really saved. In the end, they just have to have faith. Ain't that a bitch? Leonard Church. Dr. Gregory House. When I was 14, my father was stationed in Japan. I went rock climbing with this kid from school. He fell and got injured, and I had to bring him to the hospital. We came in through the wrong entrance, and passed this guy in the hall. He was a janitor. My friend came down with an infection, and the doctors didn't know what to do. So they brought in the janitor. He was a doctor. And a buraku, one of Japan's untouchables. His ancestors had been slaughterers, grave diggers. And this guy, he knew that he wasn't accepted by the staff, didn't even try. He didn't dress well. He didn't pretend to be one of them. People around that place didn't think he had anything they wanted, except when they needed him, because he was right, which meant that nothing else mattered. And they had to listen to him. Why do bad things happen to good people? We ask that question so often it's become a cliché, but that's because bad things do happen to good people constantly. You just have to hope that when it's your turn, you'll know what to do, how to cope, how to persevere. But the truth is, you don't know how you'll react to your worst case scenario. None of us do. Not until it happens. Grey's Anatomy. Yes, somehow I remember it. When you can do the things that I can do, but you don't, and then the bad things happen. They happened because of you. Peter Parker, Civil War. I'm not sure if I'm in the minority on this, but I like this one better than the Great Responsibility quote. I feel like there's an entire story in this quote, and it really gives an insight into the kind of person Peter is and how he sees the world. It's also a little sad, and it makes me want to hug that adorable teenager and tell him the bad things are not his fault, but at the same time, I kind of think he's right. With great power comes great responsibility is, yeah, true, and it's a good lesson, but I think a lot of its resonance comes from the story it came from. The quote from Civil War is kind of a story on its own. Agent Smith when talking to drugged up Morpheus. He was comparing humans to other mammals on the planet, how they all find a certain equilibrium with their environment, but humans, they don't follow that pattern, they multiply and destroy, not equilibrium. Humans follow the same pattern as parasites. We are therefore closer to what a parasite than a mammal in terms of behavioral patterns. He obviously says it in a much more eloquent way, and the way he acts, his facial expressions, Hugo really nailed that scene, and any scene Agent Smith for that matter. I was younger then, I wasn't afraid of anything, I didn't think about dying for a second. I thought I was invincible. Then I met some girl. I wanted to live, I started to think like that, for the first time I was afraid of death. I had never felt like that before. Spike Spiegel. I was frightened by this feeling because I can actually relate a bit to it. It's strange how you can begin taking care of yourself not to live longer, but because you know that if you go, you'll not only be out of time with that special someone, but that person's heart will also ache for a very long time. Even a man like Spike should have felt like he was begging death for forgiveness after spitting in its face, and this feeling hits heavy.